Let's begin with a main topic of President Biden's trip, and that is the possibility of a new global minimum on tax corporations. Have the G20 leaders reached an agreement yet?
Well, there's a general agreement on the 15% global minimum tax that a lot of the leaders have signed on to. There are a few international laggards, but they're not really among the larger economies. So there is a general agreement, but it requires national legislation to implement. And so there's a framework, I would say, but because each country needs to pass laws to actually implement it, it remains an unrealized accomplishment.
Now, another topic of conversation is the supply chain crisis. How is President Biden coordinating ways to fix this issue during this summer? Because as we understand, this is not just something that is impacting the United States, but it's actually affecting the global economic recovery.
Yeah, no, it's happening everywhere. That you've got demand for goods being transferred across the world. It's up across the world, and you have a shortage of labor just about everywhere in the world as well. Britain. We're talking about shortage of truck drivers. Britain's been dealing with the shortage of truck drivers for months and has talked about putting the military, much as Biden's talked about the National Guard. I think Biden would like to work some sort of coordinated response out, but there's so many moving parts. And the fundamental problem is the entire world decided to throw more money than was necessary at solving the pandemic. And that's created a record increase in the demand for goods to go into the supply chain. And when you increase the number of goods by 20% in 7 months, for a system that's designed, it's simply going to take time to respond. And I don't think there's something he can work out, even if they could figure out all of the different coordination issues and got people to work. When you throw 20% more demand into a system that can't expand supply that quickly, you're going to have problems. And all the talk the G20 has is not going to be able to overcome that simple, basic fact.
Yeah, we know that the G20 summit is only 2 days. So would you say that we can hear from the Biden administration later on when it comes to this issue?
They would love to be able to come out with some sort of pronouncement that says, look at what we've been able to agree on. All of the countries have a reason to want to have a face-saving announcement. But again, there's a difference between the public pronouncement that says we're going to try and work and coordinate and a workable plan that actually will reduce the backlogs and make tangible improvements in average people's lives. I think they will be highly unlikely to do something that will actually matter.
All right, one final question, Henry. Perhaps the most important, what do we know about the Iran nuclear deal talks that are taking place with G20 leaders?
Well, the thing is that it's quite clear that there's very few countries in the G20 that would not like to have a nuclear deal with Iran, and the Iranians have now said that they would like to come back into the talks. But the sticking point remains, which is to what extent are the Iranians actually willing to take real limits on their nuclear capacity? And they have used the last year to dramatically increase their uranium enrichment, which means they're much closer to being able to jump to a bomb than they were 3 years ago. And I think the G20 would like to be able to come up with a coordinated negotiating framework, particularly the frontline nations that are more directly involved, like Britain and France and Germany. But whether they can persuade the Iranians to make tangible concessions as opposed to face-saving concessions is something that remains to be seen.
Henry, we know that you've been closely following President Biden's foreign affairs. He does have another foreign trip coming up, and I do believe that climate change will be a key issue discussed. Am I correct?
Yes, well, after this, you'll be going to Glasgow. And Glasgow is where the International Climate Conference, COP26, is going to take place. And that's yet another example of a high-level meeting that was likelier to produce more hot air than substance. And there, the simple question is that it is in the developed countries' interest to reduce competition from developing countries for trade. And climate change reduction in emissions is something that makes imported goods from places like India and China more expensive. It is in the large developing countries' interest to resist actually committing to something tangible to reduce their emissions because it hurts their economic development. They would love to be able to square that circle, but I don't see how they're going to be able to do it because China is not going to suddenly hobble itself by doing something that Berlin and Washington want. And Berlin and Washington have no levers that they can exercise over Beijing to force them to do something meaningful, like cut back their use of coal in producing the goods that people purchase. So it's, I think, going to be another example of a Biden Foreign Affairs Summit that will produce a headline-getting statement and have very little impact on real-world events.
All right, final thoughts?
I think Biden's one success is that he has been more effective in the last year in putting together an anti-China alliance in the Pacific. And if he can use this face-to-face time with recalcitrant nations in Europe to say, look, if I give you this face-saving thing on climate, can you give me this tangible thing on China? That's not the sort of thing that we'll be hearing about, but it may actually be a productive use of his time. Give them the headlines, give us the substance in building an alliance with China. If Biden doesn't accomplish this, this will be 2 weeks overseas that will accomplish little besides headlines that we'll forget about by the time Thanksgiving rolls around.
All right, Washington Post correspondent Henry Olsen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, 9:15.